My white stepdad, Mark, only let me sleep from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., while his white kids got 8 hours, calling me a lazy N-word every morning at 4 a.m. with a flashlight in my face. After 2 years of this torture that left me hallucinating and failing school, I texted my Uncle Jerome to come over at 4 a.m. When Mark burst in with his ice bucket and air horn screaming racial slurs, my white stepbrothers Connor and Chase revealed they'd been secretly recording his abuse for weeks. I was 12 when my stepdad Mark gave me a cute nickname, and that was a lazy N-word. You see, for 2 years straight, Mark had one rule. I wasn't allowed to sleep. While my white siblings could sleep from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was only allowed to sleep from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. Luckily, I didn't even have to set an alarm clock, because every morning at 4 a.m., Mark would burst into my room with a flashlight in my face, checking if I was ready to do my character-building chores. This included scrubbing bathrooms, organizing the garage, prepping breakfast for when his boys woke up, but that wasn't even the worst part, because if I made any sort of noise, I'd lose privileges. The privileges in question? Eating enough food, drinking enough water, and since my mom worked 12-hour night shifts as a nurse, she never saw any of it. Mark had this whole philosophy about modern kids being soft. When I was in Afghanistan, he'd start every lecture. We functioned on 2 hours of sleep for weeks. You kids today can't even handle getting up early. I'm sure you can guess why his rules only applied to me. By month 3, I was practically schizophrenic with how much I was hallucinating, shadows moving in my peripheral vision, hearing my name when no one called. I'd fallen asleep on the toilet twice, at my desk dozens of times, and once while standing in the shower. The other black kids at my school started calling me the raccoon N-word because of the dark circles under my eyes. My grades made like a girl's chest during puberty, went from A's to D's, all because I couldn't stay conscious long enough to finish tests. Teachers thought I was on substances and said I fit the stereotype. Even the counselor pulled me aside asking if everything was okay at home. The breaking point came during midterms. I literally fell asleep standing up during my history presentation, face planted right into the whiteboard. 20 minutes later, the school nurse called my parents, and Mark showed up in his veteran's cap like he was on a rescue mission. This is what I'm talking about, he said, shaking his head in the nurse's office. No self-control. I've tried everything. Structure, discipline, consequences. Some kids just don't want to succeed. The counselor ate up every word. I don't blame you, Mark. Most white folk wouldn't even bother trying to civilize a kid like this. You're fighting genetics here. I tried telling my mom when I got home, but she was exhausted after a double shift, and Mark was right there, arm around her shoulders. He's exaggerating, Mark said calmly. Teen boys are dramatic. I'm just teaching him discipline. Bruh, I only get 4 hours of sleep, I managed to whisper. Mark laughed. See what I mean? The kid can't even keep his lies straight. My mom just sat there saying nothing. Plus, didn't your guys' ancestors used to spend all day in the cotton field anyway? You should be used to this by now. He then threw his head back and cackled. That's when I realized my mom was too scared of Mark to defend me. I wanted to call CPS, but I knew Mark would just sweet talk his way out of it. So instead, I did something I'd never done before. I went through my mom's jewelry box to find my dead dad's old phone. There, I found his brother Jerome's number. I texted him on my phone and asked if he wanted to go on a run with me at 4 a.m. Mark would be at his peak performance by then. When he agreed, I felt a chaotic excitement fill my veins. So on Thursday night, I made sure to be extra lazy at dinner. Dozed off twice, knocked over my water. Mark's eye twitched with anticipation. Looks like someone needs extra motivation tomorrow, he said, his boys snickering. At 4 a.m. sharp, the flashlight hit my face. But this time, Mark brought props. A bucket of ice water and an air horn. He was so excited to abuse me that he didn't even hear the front door open. Rise and shine, you lazy N-word, he cheered. Today we're trying something new since you can't seem to be disciplined. He was then interrupted by the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. What the F did you just call my nephew? My uncle's voice bellowed through the house. Behind him, my cousins Deshaun and Terrell. Mark's flashlight swung toward them, his face draining color. This is breaking and entering. Nah, Jerome said, stepping inside. My sister gave me a key years ago for emergencies. You don't understand, Mark stammered. I'm teaching him discipline. Bad move. Terrell, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, stepped between them. Go on, touch my cousin again. I dare you. Get out of my house, Mark screamed. That's when my stepbrother Connor appeared in the hallway. Actually, Dad, he said, holding up his phone. I think you should see what Chase and I have been recording. We're done pretending we didn't know what you were doing to him. Connor's phone screen glowed in the darkness, showing video after video of Mark's morning torture sessions. My stepbrother's hands trembled as he scrolled through the files. Chase stood beside him, jaw clenched tight. Mark lunged for the phone, but Jerome's massive frame blocked him completely. The ice bucket crashed to the floor, water splashing across Mark's legs and soaking his pajama pants. He stumbled backward, slipping on the wet hardwood. Get out! Mark screamed again, trying to push past Jerome. His military stance kicked in automatically, the same defensive position I'd seen in Connor's videos from Afghanistan. Jerome didn't budge. Connor turned the phone toward me. The screen showed 2 weeks of recordings, all time-stamped at 4 a.m. Every single morning, Mark's face twisted with rage as he screamed racial slurs. The hallway air vent had captured everything in crystal clear detail. We couldn't sleep either, Connor's voice cracked. He looked directly at Mark. Hearing what you did to him every morning for 2 years, his shoulders shook. We're done pretending we didn't hear the screaming. Mark's face went from pale to red. You ungrateful little traitors. After everything I've done for this family, that's when it hit me. Connor and Chase had been suffering too, lying awake listening to my abuse, too scared to intervene but unable to ignore it. They'd been planning this for weeks. Chase pulled out his laptop, the screen already open to a cloud storage folder labeled Evidence Mark Abuse. Dozens of files filled the screen. Videos, audio recordings, photos of my injuries, screenshots of Mark's texts. Mark lunged forward again, reaching for the laptop. Jerome's hand shot out, catching Mark's wrist mid-grab. The laptop stayed safely in Chase's hands. The front door opened. My mother stood in the doorway, still in her scrubs from her night shift. Her co-worker Sarah had covered the last 2 hours so she could come home early. She took in the scene, Mark soaked and aggressive, Jerome and his sons surrounding him, Connor and Chase with their devices, me standing there exhausted. What is going on? Her voice was barely a whisper. She checked her phone. 4:17 a.m. I had to make a choice. Let Connor explain and risk Mark's retaliation against him, or step forward myself. I watched Mark's fist clench, the same way it did before he'd hit me last month, the same way it clenched in those Afghanistan videos Connor had found. I stepped between Connor and Mark. Mom, watch the videos first. Connor quickly tapped his phone, airdropping files to her device. Mark immediately started his defense. They're lying! These videos are edited! Kids being dramatic about normal discipline? My mother's phone pinged repeatedly as files transferred. Her hand fumbled with her keys, accidentally hitting the panic button. The car alarm blared from the driveway. She scrambled to turn it off, giving Mark precious seconds. Connor leaned close to me while she dealt dealt with the alarm. Dad has backup files at his office too. We made sure he can't delete everything. Through the window, I saw Mark pull out his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. I caught a glimpse of his veteran group chat. Code red, false accusations against a brother. Need support now. The car alarm finally stopped. Mark had already shifted tactics. His eyes welled with tears, shoulders slumping. I have PTSD, he said, voice breaking. They don't understand what I've been through. I'm trying so hard with another man's son, trying to give him structure, and this is how he repays me. My mother's expression softened slightly. She'd always been susceptible to his veteran sob stories. Chase, usually the quieter twin, suddenly spoke up. He made us call Marcus the N-word too, Mom. His voice was steady but quiet. Made us laugh at it or we'd lose privileges. No Xbox, no allowance, no friends over. My mother's phone screen lit up with the first video. Mark's voice screamed from the speaker. Get up, you lazy! The slur cut through the room. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. He was using an air horn, the sound piercing even through the phone speaker. Her hands shook, but she kept watching. Her face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Blue and red lights flashed through the window. Someone had called the police about the disturbance. Probably Mrs. Patterson from next door, always monitoring the neighborhood. Mark straightened immediately, wiping his eyes. He smoothed down his wet pajamas and put on his veteran's cap from the dresser. By the time the officers knocked, he'd transformed into the concerned stepfather. Officers, Mark said, opening the door wide. Thank God you're here. My stepsons are having an episode. The older one has a history of behavioral issues. Officer Johnson entered first. Recognition flashed across his face. Mark, from the VFW meetings? Johnson. Mark's relief seemed genuine. I didn't know you worked this hit. Listen, I hate to involve you, but Marcus here has been struggling. Brought these men into my house at 4 a.m. I think he's using again. I saw the trap closing. Johnson had mentioned needing a contractor for his home renovation at last month's Veterans fundraiser. Mark's construction company would be perfect for the job. Marcus has been struggling, my mother said automatically, still clutching her phone. His father died when he was young. It's been hard for him to adjust. Jerome flinched at his sister's betrayal. His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Connor quickly posted a video clip to his private Instagram story before Mark noticed. His followers would see it before Mark could demand all phones be surrendered. Everyone needs to hand over their devices, Mark announced, to prevent false evidence from spreading. Officers, I'm sure you understand. Kids these days can manipulate videos, make things look worse than they are. I tried to explain what had been happening, but after 2 years of 4 hours of sleep, my words came out slurred and jumbled. My eyes wouldn't focus properly. I swayed on my feet, had to grab the doorframe for support. The officers exchanged looks. The substance abuse narrative was writing itself. Sir, we're going to need to take statements from everyone, Officer Johnson said, but his body language had already chosen sides. My phone buzzed. Chase had sent a text without anyone noticing. Uncle Jerome is here. Dad's in trouble. He'd sent it to his birth mother, Mark's ex-wife. Within seconds, her call came through on Mark's phone. Her voice screeched through the speaker. If my boys aren't home in 20 minutes, I'm charging Jerome with kidnapping. The custody agreement gives me emergency rights when they're in danger. More neighbors appeared at windows. Ring doorbell cameras recorded everything. Tomorrow's Neighborhood Watch Facebook page would show angry black men confronting veteran at dawn. Mrs. Patterson was probably already typing her post. Mark seized the narrative. The videos are taken out of context. Oh no, I feel so helpless watching this whole thing unfold and seeing how Mark is twisting everything around to make himself look like the victim when these poor kids have been collecting evidence of his abuse for weeks. We have an agreed upon wake-up schedule for Marcus's ADHD management. The timestamp only shows the time, not the date. This could be from one bad morning months ago. My mother's best friend Catherine pulled up outside. She owned the restaurant Mark's company was renovating. She took one look at the police cars and stayed in her vehicle, clearly choosing neutrality. If we prove the 4 a.m. wake-ups, Officer Johnson said, it shows Marcus snuck his uncle into the house. That's premeditation. Makes this whole thing look like a planned ambush. Jerome's excitement from earlier had been caught on the Ring camera. His celebration of, we got him, would look like aggression toward a veteran. Connor locked eyes with me across the room. Despite everything closing in around us, his expression stayed calm. Whatever happens, he said clearly, we have everything backed up in places he'll never find. Mark's phone buzzed constantly now. His veteran support network was mobilizing. I recognized some of the names from his stories. They'd believe whatever version he told them. The room felt smaller with each passing second. My exhaustion made everything feel surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. 2 years of sleep deprivation had prepared me for this moment in the worst possible way. I looked credible as a troubled teen, while Mark appeared as the concerned stepfather trying his best with a difficult situation. But Connor and Chase stood firm. They'd chosen their side, and it wasn't their father's. Whatever happened next, we had evidence. We had truth. The question was whether anyone would believe it. Within 48 hours, Mark had joined Officer Johnson's veteran support group. I learned this from Connor, who overheard his father practicing his speech in the bathroom. Mark stood in front of the mirror, perfecting his broken voice as he rehearsed how his troubled stepson had orchestrated an attack on him. The worst part came when Connor heard Mark misquote my dead father's favorite saying about perseverance, twisting it into something about discipline and respect. Connor reported this to me during our supervised phone call. The court had granted temporary restrictions on all communication between household members pending investigation. Mark had convinced the judge that unsupervised contact could lead to witness tampering. Connor risked punishment just to warn me that Mark had already told Mom that if the twins testified against him, she'd never see them again. Their birth mother had full custody rights if Mark deemed the home unsafe. I spent hours searching through my old text messages, trying to build a timeline of the abuse. Instead, I found something that made my stomach drop. Before Mark's rules started, I'd sent jokes to friends about staying up gaming until 4 a.m. anyway. One message even said I only needed 4 hours of sleep to function. Mark's lawyer would paint me as a gaming addict who blamed his stepfather for self-imposed exhaustion. Chase had started telling the school counselor his own version of events. Without realizing it, he parroted Mark's programming perfectly. He described how I complained about everything, even when his dad tried to be nice. The counselor documented every word, creating an official record of my supposed ingratitude. The Ring doorbell footage from our neighbor's house became evidence against me. The camera had captured me stumbling to the mailbox at 4:15 a.m. during my morning chores, looking completely disoriented. Mark claimed this proved my sleepwalking issues, suggesting I'd imagined the forced wake-ups during episodes. The timestamp matched my chore schedule perfectly, but without context, I looked like a troubled teen wandering the neighborhood at night. The emergency custody hearing treated Connor's videos as a parental alienation attempt. Since Connor still lived with Mark, the judge questioned how he could gather evidence if he was truly afraid. The prosecutor suggested Connor had been manipulated by me to turn against his father. They painted a picture of a bitter stepson poisoning the relationship between a father and his biological children. Late one night, night at Jerome's apartment, I remembered the router password from Mark's forced 4 a.m. computer basics lessons. He'd made me memorize network configurations as part of my technical education. I logged in remotely and downloaded the browsing history before Mark could delete it. Hidden in the cache were his Google searches, sleep deprivation interrogation techniques, military compliance training, psychological breaking points. He'd researched exactly how to break me without leaving physical evidence. Connor posted a cryptic Instagram story before Mark confiscated his phone. The image showed a dark room with text reading that foster care would be better than this. His followers screenshotted it before deletion, but Mark's lawyer spun it as teenage dramatics. They suggested Connor was seeking attention through social media rather than genuinely crying for help. My mother's therapist was called to testify about my adjustment issues with the blended family. The confidentiality waiver for minor welfare meant every session where Mom had vented about my behavior became evidence. The therapist's notes painted me as resistant to Mark's authority, struggling with my father's death, and acting out against a step-parent who was trying his best. I attempted to gather more evidence by recording Mark at his favorite restaurant. I sat 2 tables away, phone hidden behind a menu. But Mark had developed a 6th sense for surveillance. He spotted the phone and loudly announced to the dining room that I was recording him again, that he couldn't even eat in peace without his stepson's harassment. The owner asked me to leave while other diners shook their heads at the troubled teen stalking his poor stepfather. School pickup became another battlefield. Mark had removed me from the authorized guardian list, leaving me stranded after basketball practice. I waited 3 hours before Jerome could leave work to get me. The school resource officer documented the incident as parental concern about my associations, noting that Mark worried about gang influences from my uncle's side of the family. Jerome's boss received an anonymous complaint about an employee whose custody drama was affecting workplace productivity. The letter detailed how Jerome's involvement in family court was causing disruptions. Jerome got written up and warned that another incident would mean termination. He had 3 kids of his own to feed, and Mark knew exactly where to apply pressure. Small violations of territory began appearing everywhere. Mark now drank from my father's favorite mug, the one with the faded Marines logo that Mom had kept separate for years. He'd moved his clothes to my father's side of the closet, his cologne mixed with the lingering scent on my dad's old pillow. Each change was too small to document but felt like deliberate erasure. Mark offered a deal through his lawyer. If I publicly apologized for lying and agreed to attend a therapeutic military school, he'd forgive everything. The school specialized in troubled teens who needed structure and discipline. Their website featured testimonials from reformed young men who credited the program with saving their lives. The subtext was clear: admit I was lying or disappear into a system designed to break rebellious spirits. I refused. Within hours, Mark's Facebook post about choosing hatred over healing family went viral in our community. He'd crafted the perfect narrative of a stepfather trying everything to connect with a bitter stepson who preferred destroying the family over accepting discipline. The comments filled with support for Mark and condemnation for ungrateful children who didn't appreciate good men stepping up. Connor's recordings revealed something I hadn't noticed in my exhaustion. Reviewing the files with Jerome's girlfriend, who worked as a nurse, we could see my physical deterioration over months. My speech patterns changed, my motor functions declined, my reaction times slowed. Connor had documented not just abuse, but the systematic destruction of my cognitive abilities. We discovered Mom had been keeping her own records, hidden in her work notebook, using medical abbreviations Mark couldn't understand. She documented my symptoms for 2 years: chronic fatigue, micro-sleep episodes, cognitive impairment, emotional dysregulation. She'd known exactly what was happening and created a medical record to protect herself legally while doing nothing to stop it. The evidence should have been damning, but context mattered. One video showed Mark attempting to connect with me through tough love before the sleep deprivation began. He tried teaching me woodworking, sharing military stories, including me in family activities. His lawyer would argue that extreme measures only came after normal parenting failed with a difficult child. Jerome faced an impossible choice when a second complaint arrived at his workplace. His supervisor made it clear one more incident meant termination. He had his own children to consider, child support to pay, rent to maintain. I watched him wrestle with the decision before he chose his job, but his girlfriend quietly funneled money to a lawyer through her account, keeping Jerome's support hidden from Mark's surveillance. I found myself adopting Mark's tactics without meaning to. During a supervised visit, I told Chase that his father never wanted him, only used the twins to hurt me. I watched Chase's face crumble and immediately hated myself. Mark had taught me how to weaponize words, and I'd learned the lesson too well. A chance encounter at the grocery store revealed more history. Connor's birth mother pretended not to recognize me until Mark left to check prices in another aisle. She quickly whispered about Mark's controlling behavior during their marriage, the financial manipulation, the isolation from family. She documented everything but lost custody anyway, when Mark's lawyer portrayed her as unstable. She slipped me a flash drive before Mark returned, evidence from their divorce that showed patterns. Court-ordered discovery revealed Mark's previous CPS investigation from his first marriage. The case had closed without action, but the reports showed familiar patterns. Early morning wake-ups for the older child, military-style discipline, complaints dismissed as cultural differences in parenting styles. The investigator had noted concerns, but found insufficient evidence for intervention. Mark's veteran friends rallied to his defense. They organized a mediation meeting, presenting it as neutral intervention, but really protecting their image of Mark as a war hero. These men had served with him, trusted him, couldn't believe he'd harm a child. They offered to mentor me, to provide the male guidance I clearly needed. Their solution involved more military-style discipline, not less. The custody battle drained Mom's savings, while Mark used joint accounts to fund his lawyer. Every motion, every hearing, every document cost money we didn't have. Meanwhile, Mark's construction business thrived on contracts from his veteran network. He had resources and connections while we scraped together pennies for justice. A public confrontation at the basketball court where I'd played since childhood turned ugly. Younger kids who'd looked up to me watched as Mark arrived, claiming concern for their safety around me. He spoke to their parents about my instability, my false accusations, the danger I posed to their children. By the time he left, I was no longer welcome at the court where my father had taught me to shoot free throws. I slept on Jerome's couch while Mark posted family photos on social media. Every image showed him with Mom and the twins at restaurants, amusement parks, family gatherings. My absence was deliberate erasure, each photo declaring that the family functioned better without me. Connor later told me he'd been forced to smile for those pictures, threatened with losing contact with Mom if he didn't perform happiness. The breaking point came in a text at 2 a.m. Mom's message was simple but devastating. She begged me to come home and apologize, said she couldn't lose another family. The implication was clear. She'd chosen Mark's stability over her son's safety. The house, the financial security, the intact family image mattered more than and protecting me from abuse. Connor's teacher, who led the church youth group, noticed the twins' distress and tried to help. She contacted social services about her concerns, breaking mandatory reporting protocols by going through unofficial channels first. The delay in proper reporting cost her job. The suspension made headlines in our small community, painting her as negligent rather than compassionate. Her husband blamed their financial stress on our family drama. Their marriage counseling sessions focused on the cascade of consequences from getting involved in other people's problems. Mark had successfully made helping us radioactive, ensuring others would think twice before intervening. I continued gathering evidence despite knowing Connor and Chase faced increasing retaliation for their initial support. Every piece of proof I collected meant more pressure on them. Mark had made them choose between their brother and their daily survival, a cruel equation with no good answer. Deshaun asked the question I couldn't answer during one of our meetings. He'd seen similar cases fail, watched other kids return to abusive homes when evidence wasn't enough. His doubt was reasonable, but heartbreaking. I couldn't promise victory because the system wasn't designed to believe kids like us over men like Mark. The admission that broke me came during a deposition. I had to confess that during one exhaustion-induced rage, I'd hit Chase. It happened months ago, when he'd woken me after only 2 hours of sleep to ask about homework. I'd swung without thinking, caught him in the shoulder. The guilt ate at me, but now it became evidence of my violence and instability. Mom's hidden notebooks revealed another betrayal. I'd slept through her birthday dinner the previous year, too exhausted to wake up despite her attempts. She documented this as evidence of my selfishness, not recognizing it as a symptom of the abuse she enabled. Mark's narrative of me as an ungrateful son gained support from her own records. Mark's lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming parental alienation. The court date moved up 3 weeks, catching us unprepared. My lawyer had a scheduling conflict with another trial, leaving us scrambling for representation. Every tactical move Mark made showed careful planning while we played desperate defense. The twisted logic of Mark's worldview emerged during psychological evaluation. He genuinely believed military discipline would have saved my father from the weakness that unalived him. In his mind, breaking me down was building me up, honoring my mother's first marriage by fixing the son left behind. His delusion made him more dangerous because he believed his own righteousness. I had to manipulate Mom when she was exhausted after a double shift, using her vulnerability to extract admissions about what she knew. I promised never to use Mark's tactics against family, but survival required betraying that promise. Getting her to admit knowledge while she was too tired to guard her words felt like becoming the monster Mark claimed I was. My strategic side emerged in community spaces. I planted seeds of doubt about Mark during parent meetings at the community center, carefully framing concerns as worried observations rather than accusations. Some parents began questioning his involvement with their children, creating small fractures in his public image. An honest conversation with Chase about morning routines led to unexpected revelation. Without prompting, he shared journal entries about the guilt of listening to my abuse without helping. His words showed the secondary trauma Mark had inflicted on his biological sons, forcing them to be complicit in torture through their silence. Small victories felt hollow against larger defeats. Getting supervised visitation rights meant nothing when Mark wept genuine tears about losing his boys. Connor hugged him goodbye after one visit, and I saw Mark's satisfaction at maintaining that emotional hold. The manipulation was so deep that even awareness couldn't break its power. Mark's counterclaim gained traction with the guardian ad litem. He painted me as violent and unstable, using my own admissions and Mom's documentation as evidence. The court-appointed advocate meant to protect children's interests began seeing me as the problem rather than the victim. Everything hinged on Connor's willingness to testify in open court. The pressure on a 15-year-old to speak against his father before a judge was immense. Mark had 2 years of psychological conditioning on his side, while we had only truth and hope that it would be enough. Past kindnesses became leverage against me. I'd tutored Chase in math, helped him raise his grades. Now he reminded me of promises to always protect him, while describing how his father cried every night since the investigation began. The guilt was a weapon Mark wielded through his son's genuine emotions. The community center board split over supporting Mark versus protecting children. His construction company's sponsorship of youth programs created financial pressure. Board members who questioned him risked losing funding for activities that served hundreds of kids. Money talked louder than conscience in budget meetings. The judge required clear and convincing evidence for any emergency custody change. Videos alone weren't sufficient without documented patterns. We had pieces of truth but needed a complete picture that the legal system would recognize. The burden of proof sat heavily on young shoulders, already bent from exhaustion. A school counselor who was also a veteran saw through Mark's performance. She recognized real PTSD from manufactured military persona. Her professional assessment of my symptoms matched textbook cases of systematic sleep torture. She knew the techniques because she'd seen them used in interrogation resistance training. But professional ethics limited her involvement. She could provide partial documentation without risking her license, but full testimony would require admissions that could end her career. Another adult who saw the truth but couldn't afford to tell it completely, leaving children to navigate adult consequences alone. The assessment confirmed what we suspected. I showed classic signs of systematic sleep deprivation used as torture. The counselor recognized the technique because military personnel learned to resist it. Mark had applied interrogation methods to a child in his care, showing deliberate intent rather than misguided discipline. Understanding the depth of betrayal came when I found Mom's medical notebooks. 2 years of detailed symptom documentation and professional terminology proved she'd known exactly what was happening. She'd created legal protection for herself while allowing the abuse to continue. The records showed a nurse documenting torture while a mother enabled it. I had to accept that Mom chose financial security over my safety. The house, the stability, the 2-income household meant more than protecting her son. She'd watched me deteriorate for 2 years and chose to document rather than intervene. The betrayal cut deeper than Mark's abuse because it came from someone who should have protected me. Despite everything, I committed to protecting Connor and Chase. They'd risked everything to help me, and I wouldn't abandon them to Mark's retaliation. Whatever happened in court, I'd ensure they had support and witnesses to their own struggles. Breaking cycles meant protecting others, even when you couldn't save yourself. Mark's veteran benefit application contained discrepancies. The court filing showed different service dates than he'd claimed publicly. Connor had found discharge papers in the attic that didn't match the heroic narrative Mark had built. His military service was real but embellished, another tool of manipulation rather than honest history. I presented evidence calmly during the next hearing, maintaining dignity while Mark's lies unraveled. Each document was submitted without emotion, letting facts speak louder than accusations. Connor watched his father's true history emerge, seeing the man behind the mythology for the first time. Patterns emerged across Mark's life. Military service ended with disciplinary issues glossed over as personality conflicts. His first marriage showed escalating control until his ex-wife fled. Now, our family repeated the cycle with variations on the same theme. He was a serial controller who used different tactics for different victims. Both sides prepared for the final custody hearing, where the twins' testimony would decide everything. Mark's lawyer would attack their credibility, while ours would try to protect them from further trauma. Two boys would sit in a courtroom and choose between truth and survival, an impossible decision no child should face. The assessment results arrived at Jerome's apartment 3 days before the final hearing. My hands shook as I opened the envelope, finding exactly what the counselor had warned me about. Permanent cognitive damage from 2 years of systematic sleep deprivation. The medical terminology described reduced processing speed, impaired executive function, chronic microsleep episodes. Mark had literally broken parts of my brain that might never fully heal. I searched through Mom's work bag while she showered after another double shift. Her medical notebooks contained more than symptom documentation. Page after page showed medication dosages, sleep cycle charts, cognitive test results she'd administered secretly. She'd tracked my deterioration with clinical precision, creating evidence that protected her nursing license while documenting her son's torture. The betrayal went deeper than passive enabling. She'd actively participated in the medical monitoring of abuse, using her professional skills to ensure Mark stayed within legal boundaries. Each entry showed calculation rather than concern, a mother choosing career protection over child safety. Connor texted me screenshots of Mark's veteran benefit application from the court filing. The service dates didn't match his stories, and his discharge classification raised questions. His Bronze Star citation contained inconsistencies with official records Connor found online. The hero narrative Mark built was partially fabricated, another manipulation tool. I met with our lawyer at the community center, reviewing evidence for the final hearing. She explained that proving abuse wasn't enough without showing immediate danger. The twins still lived with Mark, attended school, appeared healthy. The court would weigh stability against allegations, often choosing the devil they knew. Chase's journal entries revealed increasing pressure at home. Mark had started wake-up drills with the twins, claiming they needed discipline too. Nothing as extreme as my treatment, but enough to remind them of consequences for betrayal. Connor documented these new patterns, building evidence while living under threat. The Guardian ad litem's report landed like a bomb. She'd concluded that while concerning behaviors existed, the family dysfunction ran too deep for simple custody changes. Her recommendation included family therapy, supervised transitions, and gradual reconciliation. She'd bought Mark's performance of a flawed but trying father. I discovered Mark had been meeting with other veterans who'd faced custody challenges. They'd coached him on courtroom presentation, emotional triggers for judges, ways to frame military service as qualification for parenting. His support network provided strategies while mine offered only sympathy. Jerome's girlfriend revealed she'd been recording conversations at family gatherings for months. Mark didn't know she existed, allowing her to capture unguarded moments. One recording caught him explaining his philosophy about breaking weak children to rebuild them stronger. His own words condemned him better than any accusation. The community center board meeting turned into a battleground. Parents who'd noticed changes in their children after Mark's involvement spoke up. Others defended him as a positive male role model. The discussion revealed how deeply Mark had embedded himself in community structures, making extraction painful for everyone. Connor's birth mother agreed to testify about patterns from their marriage. She'd lost custody battles before, but kept meticulous records. Her evidence showed Mark's escalation patterns, how he tested boundaries before implementing systematic control. She'd watched him do to her what he later perfected on me. I spent the night before the hearing organizing evidence with Jerome. We created timeline charts showing pattern escalation, medical documentation of damage, witness statements from teachers who'd noticed changes. The pile of proof seemed overwhelming, but legal standards required more than truth. The courthouse morning arrived gray and humid. I dressed carefully in clothes Jerome bought, trying to look responsible rather than damaged. My hands shook from exhaustion despite months of recovery sleep. The micro-sleep episodes hit without warning, my brain still broken from 2 years of torture. Mark arrived with his veteran supporters, all wearing service pins and caps. They filled one side of the courtroom like a military formation. Their presence sent a clear message about community standing and brotherhood bonds. Several were prominent business owners who employed half the town. Mom sat between the two groups, physically representing her torn loyalties. She'd dressed professionally but looked haggard, the weight of choices visible in her posture. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, unable to face what she'd allowed. Connor and Chase entered with their maternal grandmother, who'd driven 6 hours to support them. Their mother couldn't attend due to work obligations, but she'd sent a detailed affidavit about Mark's controlling behaviors during marriage. The twins looked smaller than their 15 years, shoulders hunched under invisible weight. The judge called the hearing to order, reviewing previous testimony and evidence. She noted the extensive documentation from both sides, the community division, the complexity of blended family dynamics. Her tone suggested exhaustion with family cases that had no clear villains or heroes. Mark's lawyer began with a masterful presentation of a struggling stepfather trying to provide structure for a troubled teen. He acknowledged mistakes while framing them as misguided love. The sleep deprivation became an inappropriate but well-intentioned attempt at discipline rather than deliberate torture. Our lawyer countered with medical evidence showing brain scans that revealed actual damage from chronic sleep deprivation. She presented Mark's research history, proving premeditation. The pattern across marriages showed serial abuse rather than isolated incidents. Connor took the stand first, voice barely audible as he described morning wake-ups, racial slurs, forced participation in abuse. His hands gripped the witness box as he admitted laughing at jokes about me to avoid punishment. Mark watched his son with an expression of wounded betrayal that looked genuine to observers. Chase followed, reading from his journal about guilt, fear, confusion. He described new wake-up drills Mark had started, subtle threats about foster care if they testified. His testimony revealed secondary trauma, children forced to witness and participate in abuse. The veteran counselor testified about recognizing interrogation techniques applied to a child. She carefully stayed within professional boundaries while making clear that Mark knew exactly what he was doing. Her military background gave credibility that civilian experts lacked. Mark took the stand like a soldier reporting for duty. He admitted mistakes while painting himself as a father pushed too far by a defiant stepson. His tears seemed genuine as he described trying to honor my father's memory by providing discipline. Several veterans in the gallery wiped their eyes. Mom's testimony broke my heart. She acknowledged knowing about the wake-ups, but claimed she thought they were consensual. Her medical training somehow didn't extend to recognizing torture symptoms in her own son. She begged the court to keep the family together, to mandate therapy rather than separation. The judge called a recess, leaving everyone to stew in uncomfortable silence. Mark's supporters whispered encouragement, while our side huddled around evidence boxes. The twins sat between groups, belonging nowhere. When court resumed, the judge delivered a mixed verdict that satisfied no one. She found evidence of inappropriate discipline, but not criminal abuse. Custody arrangements would be modified, but not severed. Mark would undergo mandatory parenting classes and therapy. The twins could choose their primary residence at 16. The most significant ruling involved me. The judge granted Jerome full guardianship, recognizing that returning home would be harmful. The way Connor's hands gripped that witness box while admitting he laughed at those awful jokes just to protect himself makes me sad. These poor boys are stuck between groups in that courtroom belonging nowhere, and that judge's mixed verdict that calls systematic torture inappropriate discipline must feel like such a betrayal to everyone who fought so hard to show the truth. But she also mandated family therapy sessions, supervised visitation, and gradual reconciliation efforts. The system's solution was to acknowledge harm while forcing continued contact with the source. Mark's supporters erupted in quiet celebration, vindicated that their brother wasn't a criminal. Our side sat stunned at the minimal consequences for documented torture. The judge had split the baby, keeping the family technically intact while acknowledging its dysfunction. Outside the courthouse, Mark approached with his lawyer. He offered a handshake and words about healing and moving forward. His performance continued even after winning, maintaining the image of a reasonable man extending olive branches. I kept my hands at my sides. Connor and Chase chose to stay with their maternal grandmother temporarily. The new wake-up drills had scared them enough to accept disruption over stability. Mark's face showed genuine shock at losing his biological sons, the first consequence that actually hurt him. The community split, deepened after the verdict. Some saw a vindication of a good man falsely accused. Others recognized the system's failure to protect children. The community center board voted to maintain Mark's sponsorships, but require supervision for youth programs. Another compromise that protected no one. Jerome drove me to his apartment in silence. We'd won guardianship, but lost the war for justice. Mark would continue his life with minimal disruption, while I carried permanent brain damage. The system had acknowledged harm while ensuring no real accountability. That night, I lay awake despite exhaustion, my broken brain unable to maintain consistent sleep cycles. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark had trained me for a lifetime of 4 a.m. wake-ups, internal alarms that would never fully reset. His torture had achieved its goal of permanent change. The next months passed in a blur of therapy appointments, supervised visitations, and slow adjustment to life with Jerome. Mark performed contrition at every mandated interaction, the perfect image of a father learning from mistakes. Only the twins and I saw the satisfaction in his eyes. Connor started documenting again, this time tracking Mark's therapy performance versus private behavior. The gap between public remorse and private justification widened with each session, but documentation meant nothing after the court had already decided. 6 months later, I spoke at a school assembly about recognizing abuse. Connor and Chase sat in the audience, our healing journeys separate but parallel. Mom sat alone in the house she'd chosen over her son, surrounded by things but empty of family. Mark attended counseling sessions where he learned to use better words for the same beliefs. I built a new life where sleep came naturally, where mornings meant possibility rather than punishment. The brain damage persisted, but adaptation was possible. Jerome's family provided the stability Mark had weaponized, showing that structure could exist without cruelty. The fractures in our community remained visible. Some families pulled their children from programs Mark sponsored. Others doubled down on support for a veteran they saw as persecuted. The truth lived in the space between narratives, too complex for simple resolution. Mark never faced jail or criminal charges. The system deemed his actions inappropriate but not illegal, abusive but not criminal. He lost his son's trust but kept his business, his reputation among supporters, his freedom. Justice looked like supervised visitation and mandatory therapy, consequences that felt hollow against permanent damage. I learned to live with broken sleep patterns, micro-sleep episodes, cognitive delays that marked me as survivor and victim simultaneously. Recovery meant adaptation rather than healing, building new pathways around damaged neural territory. Mark had left fingerprints on my brain that no amount of therapy could fully erase. The twins found their own path, choosing distance from both parents while maintaining cautious contact. They carried their own invisible scars, the weight of witnessed abuse and forced complicity. Their healing required separation from the battlefield their home had become. Years would pass before full understanding of the damage emerged. Medical scans would reveal the extent of cognitive impairment, the permanent alterations to sleep architecture, the neurological fingerprints of systematic torture. But by then, statutes of limitations and legal technicalities would prevent any meaningful justice. The story ended not with dramatic confrontation or legal victory, but with quiet survival. A black boy who'd been systematically tortured by his white stepfather found safety with chosen family. The system that should have protected him offered compromises instead of justice. Mark faced inconvenience rather than accountability. In the end, I built a life where black boys could sleep safely through the night, where 4 a.m. meant nothing more than a number on the clock, where discipline didn't require destruction and love didn't demand breaking. It wasn't justice, but it was survival. Sometimes that's the only victory available. Jerome made coffee every morning at a reasonable hour, no flashlights or air horns required. We'd sit together as the sun rose naturally, not forced awake by cruelty. He'd sometimes read morning devotions, words about justice and mercy that felt hollow after experiencing neither. But the routine itself provided healing, showing that structure could exist without abuse. The permanent damage served as a daily reminder of the 2 years stolen by Mark's torture, but I refused to let him steal the future too. Each night of peaceful sleep was a small victory. Each morning waking naturally was resistance. Healing happened in tiny increments, too slow for dramatic narrative, but real nonetheless. The community never fully healed from the division Mark created. His supporters continued defending a veteran they saw as unfairly maligned. Others quietly withdrew their children from his sphere of influence. The truth lived in the uncomfortable middle, too complex for the simple narratives both sides craved. My story became a cautionary tale whispered in certain circles. Parents paid closer attention to their children's exhaustion. Teachers questioned sudden grade drops more carefully. Small changes rippled through the community. Prevention born from failure to protect. But Mark continued his life largely unchanged. He attended therapy, performed growth, spoke the language of accountability without internalizing its meaning. The system had given him a script to follow, and he played the role perfectly. Only those who'd lived under his control recognized the performance. The twins graduated high school living with their grandmother, maintaining careful distance from both parents. They'd learned that love could be weaponized, that family could mean danger, that sometimes survival required separation. Their caution broke my heart while confirming its necessity. I pursued education despite cognitive limitations, learning to work around the damage Mark had inflicted. Each achievement felt like resistance, proof that he hadn't broken everything. But the extra effort required, the accommodations needed, served as constant reminders of what he'd stolen. Mom eventually divorced Mark, but only after Connor and Chase aged out of custody arrangements. She claimed awakening to his manipulation, but we all knew she'd simply run out of children to sacrifice. Her attempts at reconciliation felt hollow, too late to matter. The physical effects of chronic sleep deprivation never fully resolved. Doctors explained that adolescent brain development disrupted by systematic torture left permanent marks. I'd carry Mark's fingerprints in my neural pathways forever, a biological monument to survived abuse. But survival itself was victory. Every black boy who slept safely because someone recognized the signs of abuse. Every parent who questioned unusual discipline. Every teacher who looked deeper at exhausted students. The ripples spread slowly but steadily. Mark's final attempt at contact came through a letter expressing regret for misunderstandings and hope for future reconciliation. The language was therapeutic, coached, empty of genuine accountability. I filed it with other evidence, documentation of a man who never truly understood his crimes. The ending wasn't clean or satisfying in traditional narrative terms. No dramatic justice, no clear victory, no moment of triumph. Just a young black man learning to sleep through the night, building life around permanent damage, finding family in those who chose protection over complicity. Some stories end with bang. Mine ended with the quiet sound of regular breathing through an uninterrupted night, with morning coffee shared in peace, with the small daily victories of a life reclaimed from systematic destruction. It wasn't the ending anyone would choose, but it was real, and it was mine. Thanks for joining me on this difficult story. Hope you all have a peaceful evening. Peace.